The following is a presentation of Muddy River News.
A great night's sleep starts at Harvey's Furniture. Check out the large selection of complete bedroom sets. And when it comes to mattresses, we have a full selection from Bemco, Spring Air, and Chatham & Wells. Harvey's Furniture. Our home, your home.
Welcome to Muddy River News this week. I'm Bob Gough. My guest today is Ray Long, of course, who wrote the book on Mike Madigan, the house that Madigan built. And he, of course, has been also covering the trial in Chicago involving what has been commonly known as the ComEd 4. But here in Quincy, and one of them was Mike McLean, the longtime lobbyist, former state representative. And now Mike McLean was found guilty on 9 charges of bribery. Ray Long joins us today. Welcome, Ray.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
What was your, right off the bat, did the verdict surprise you at all?
You know, it really didn't, because juries can go either way on these. The other reason is because there was so much information that came out. I felt like I was running around every day of the trial trying to catch a waterfall with a tin can. They really put together a broad-based case, and the only argument that the defense, including McLean, had was, we're just doing business as usual. And the jury didn't think it was business as usual to be putting a bunch of people onto the payroll that Mike Madigan wanted. And by putting on the payroll, this is sending money to subcontractors of a lobbyist to do little or nothing except maybe campaign for Mike Madigan. So it was not your traditional cash in a bag type bribe. It was a sophisticated scheme, and the jury came out unanimous, of course, and said that they're all guilty on all counts.
You know, in looking at this, with ComEd obviously having to do a lot of business with the state of Illinois, being regulated by the Illinois Commerce Commission, for
Yes.
them to get the breaks and the favors that they did, and they basically then turned around and passed those costs on to their customers, Illinois taxpayers. I think that's the thing that is the most egregious of it all, is really that's how the system worked. And that's how people, when people are like, well, how does this affect me? That's how it affects you.
Right. There were efforts to try to curb the amount of money going to ComEd. ComEd did have a good argument that, hey, what they put in place, especially in 2011, when they installed smart grids around so that you could figure out who was down, whose power was down, and whose was off and whose wasn't, a lot easier than the old way by knocking on doors or waiting for somebody to call. It was computerized, and that plus an upgrade in infrastructure. Nobody can argue that that was bad, but they set in stone and then got it re-upped several times. The idea that a formula rate that would continue to shove money toward ComEd was just too lucrative.
And the fact that all of this would be a sunset, so they always had to go back to Madigan to make sure they could keep on keeping on.
Right, exactly. So that meant they were always beholden to the legislature, which a point was made in the trial that was, that was part of the scheme. Although you can argue again, you can always make altruistic arguments about all the things they were doing. And one of the arguments for them on that was, well, the legislature wanted to see how well their law was going. Of course, on the flip side, you don't need to put a sunset clause in to make a law expire. If you don't like it, you can always change it. So it was really something that forced or allegedly forced these people with ComEd to come back to the legislature, as you said, to come back to Mike Madigan.
what was the straw that broke the camel's back? What was the thing that in your opinion, as a longtime observer of Springfield politics and watching this trial, what was the thing that you think won it for the prosecution?
Well, it struck me that there were a couple of things. One was a juror even said yesterday that there were very candid conversations between Mike McLean, who was a lobbyist, a longtime lobbyist, obviously, for ComEd, and then later a consultant, and John Hooker, who was a longtime lobbyist for ComEd, who the internal lobbyist for ComEd, their point guy with the legislature. And then he also went on contract after he retired, stayed with them. And they had a very candid conversation about how they set up the whole system where some of Madigan's guys would be slipped onto lobbyist payrolls as subcontractors. And those are the subcontractors who were basically ghost subcontractors. Most of them didn't have to do any work. One of them did some, but it wasn't much at all.
And I think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that was what the juror said, and I also thought that there was an overwhelming amount of evidence that was presented that covered many of the bases and raised many questions as to why they didn't stop at some point. It was really not just a situation where Madigan created an atmosphere where you felt you had to give, allegedly, but that they were happy to give because they thought that would help them get what they wanted.
And I think when you look at, how Mike Madigan, as you pointed out in your book, how Mike Madigan had accumulated all this power over the years, and the only thing he cared about was that power, was the
Right.
fact that, he always famously said, "I just want one vote. I want your vote to be speaker." But then he took he took his hammer, so to speak, and then used it on everybody to really bend the political will of an entire state to him.
Well, it's a really interesting study here because there is more coming. Of course, Madigan and McLean are both charged with racketeering, and that will involve some of the major parts of this scheme that was discussed here with the ComEd for the already convicted Mike McLean, but it will also include how they worked with AT&T, which also has acknowledged that they had worked with Madigan to put somebody on the payroll there just because Madigan wanted him paid. So as a former legislator, and this is going to be combined. It's a combined ComEd and AT&T trial so far. I mean, they came back with a superseding indictment. They initially indicted Madigan and McLean on this an offshoot of this ComEd scheme, or the overview of the overarching scheme of this ComEd issue, and then they came back later with a superseding indictment for AT&T. I'm not saying that I expect more, but there's still a long time between now and the trial on April 1, 2024.
And like you said, AT&T and ComEd have both paid fines acknowledging
Right.
involvement in this. And I think as you and everybody else who covered this trial for the last few weeks wrote, that although Michael Madigan was not on trial here, he was on trial there.
Yeah, he's definitely the central character. He's the missing elephant in the room in this trial, and he was the guy that the jurors came out and said, look, he created this whole thing. One juror even said, if it hadn't been for Madigan, they would have, these defendants probably would not have been in the position they're in.
Well, again, I mean, that's very true, especially with Mike McLean of Quincy, Madigan's longtime right-hand man. Again, best friends, vacation, the whole nine yards. And I've been trying to ever since this verdict came down yesterday. I've been trying to talk to a lot of longtime Quincy political folks. Can't get very many of them to go on the record one way or the other on this, right? But they're willing to just talk about well, all the good he did, but also you never said no to Mike McLean. Nobody in Quincy ever did, because they all knew what could happen. And again, Mike, whenever a Tom Oakley wanted a road or a bridge built, he went to McLean, who went to Madigan, and that's how the system worked. And you had a lot of, a lot of politicians who on both sides of the aisle recognized they needed Mike's help. He and Art Tenhouse worked very closely together. Art Tenhouse, of course, succeeded Jeff Mays, the man who knocked Mike McLean out of the House, which McLean has joked numerous times over the years. I want to thank Jeff Mays for making me a rich man. And he said that. And, and trying to talk to these guys. But everybody's like, nobody, I think, really, Mike did a lot of good things in Quincy. People do acknowledge that. They still want to acknowledge that. They don't want to acknowledge what just happened. Although it is definitely the opposite side of a coin, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, even the jurors came out and said that we like these people, these four defendants, but what they did was wrong. And so they have to be held accountable.
And you can give all the money to all the churches you want and all the schools you want, and you can do all the fundraising and get things named after you and stuff, but you still can't do certain things. And I think that's what yesterday's decision was. Look, that doesn't matter. What matters here is you used the system for your benefit, for your personal and political benefit. And those four people who were found guilty on all charges, again, there's not a lot of wiggle room when it's guilty, unanimous, every charge.
Right. Yeah, I think they were shocked, the defendants, that it was a complete, clean sweep.
What, one thing I haven't seen, do we have any idea of what sentencing could be?
Well, the conspiracy charge brings with it a maximum of 5 years. The bribery counts bring a maximum of 10 years, and the falsification of records could be 20. Now, no way I see that they will get as many as 10 or 20 years, but this will be a real interesting sentencing, because all of these folks have not been career criminals and don't have records, so they can make an argument for some leniency, but I don't know whether the judge will be in the mood for that. Certainly, I don't expect the prosecution to be in the mood for that. So there'll be certain guidelines that they'll follow, and they'll have to go through all kinds of calculations, practically calculus, to get to the minimum and maximum that they can sentence. And then it'll be up to the judge to see what he thinks is fair. It's interesting because Judge Harry Leinenweber used to be a legislator himself. Of course, it was many, many years ago. He left, I believe, in about 1982, 83. And so he understands the world of Springfield. Obviously, he was there 10 years, and he may be able to put it into a perspective that very few people could.
Ironically, he served roughly the same time as McLean.
Yes, that's true.
Well, and do we know when sentencing is going to be?
They haven't set the dates yet.
And then, of course, we'll have appeals, it sounds like.
Right.
And then we have next April. So
yeah, then we'll come back, and April 1st is the racketeering trial with McLean and Madigan. You're right.
Final question. Has this put a damper on the way business is done in Springfield?
Well, it should, but there is a caveat. Not everybody has been wheeling and dealing in this way or this manner. So it may be a good thing for the folks who have been straight shooters as lobbyists and lawmakers all along, but the ones who have been doing things, stretching the limits or going beyond the limits of what's legal will certainly be a little bit more careful if they're smart.
Ray Long with the Chicago Tribune. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon down the road.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Good to be here.
All right, Ray Long, I want to again thank him for his time. I want to thank you for watching Muddy River News this week. I'm Bob Gough. We'll see you next week.
Muddy River News. Our home, our news.